In this video, we're going to do a quick review of the classification of matter. You saw this in grade 9, but we'll quickly review it in grade 10 so you understand where we're going with chemistry. Remember that matter can be divided into two things. It can be divided into pure substances and mixtures. So, matter is really anything that has a mass and a volume. And that's not energy or heat. So when you look at matter, as I mentioned, it can be pure substances or mixtures. So we can have, we'll put mixtures over here, and we'll put pure substances over here. In grade 9, you learned about this, and you saw that mixtures could be where it looks, you have more than one type of particle, and sometimes a mixture might look like a uniform composition. It might look like there's only one type, like salt water. You can't even tell there's more than one type in there. So that would be an example of a homogeneous mixture. Whereas sometimes you can see the different particles and tell them apart. So if you have a snack with different, you have raisins, pretzels, and crackers, you can see all the different particles of the mixture. That would be heterogeneous. Hetero meaning different. Now, that's what you focused on in grade 9, mixtures. You also learned about pure substances. You learned that pure substances can be elements. You also learned that they could be compounds. And if you look at the elements, elements could be monoatomic elements, meaning they're just like one atom of that element. So for example, Cu is one atom of copper, but they could also be molecular, meaning more than one of that atom. So for example, H2 is a molecular element. It's not a compound because it's two of the same elements connected together. And then compounds, you might not have learned this, but some of you may have already. They can exist as two types. They can be ionic or molecular as well. Sometimes the molecular compounds are called covalent. And ionic compounds, remember, they're made up of a metal and a nonmetal. So NaCl is an example. Whereas molecular compounds are only nonmetals. But the difference between molecular compound and molecular element is that the molecular element is two of the same nonmetals connected. Same. And then molecular compound is two different nonmetals connected to each other. And so in grade 10, we focus on the pure substance area here. And more specifically, we focus on the compound area, looking at ionic compounds and molecular compounds, how they differ, and also not just composition-wise and properties-wise, but also with naming rules and formula rules that we'll learn throughout the grade 10 course. So that's just a review of the classification of matter that you would have seen in grade 9. We added a little bit of a focus, a little bit of an emphasis here on compounds because we're going to see in grade 10. And now that we've seen that review, you're able to do these practice problems here. So I recommend you pause the video and you try them out yourself, and then you unpause the video to check your work. So now we'll check our work. I'm not going to write everything out, but we're going to discuss these problems here. So compare and contrast atomic elements and molecular elements. Find similarities and difference. Provide one example of each. So our atomic elements, an example would be just sodium, just Na. A molecular element, an example could be O2. So atomic elements, as we see in our definition here, also called monoatomic elements, they're just a single atom of the element. And so we wrote Na as the example, whereas molecular elements, they're two or more of the same element chemically combined. So O2 is an example, H2 is an example. And so we provide an example of each, and if you were to describe the differences, these are the differences here, like this, and it's always the same element. Now, if we're looking at molecular elements and molecular compounds. So a molecular element example, we already gave one already in the previous question, O2, a molecular compound, H2O. Now, something similar is that these, both of them, molecular, are made up of nonmetals only connected together. But the difference is that the molecular element is two of the same nonmetals, and the molecular compound is two different nonmetals connected to each other. Now, let's look at ionic and molecular. Ionic, an example would be NaCl. Molecular, an example would be H2O. So they're both compounds, so they're both made up of two different elements connected together. That's a similarity. And the difference is that ionic is made up of a metal and nonmetal, but molecular of only nonmetals. The example for ionic we gave was NaCl, and for molecular was H2O. So notice that in each question, when I tried to answer the question, I tried to get everything that the question was asking. So for example here, I said similarities. They're both compounds, so made of two or more different elements connected together. It's a similarity. I gave differences. Ionic is a metal and a nonmetal, whereas molecular is two nonmetals. So I gave my differences. And then I also gave one example of each, NaCl, H2O. So when you answer questions, it's important that you look at what the question is asking for, and you get all parts of it. Same thing here. Molecular elements and molecular compounds. I mentioned a similarity, nonmetals only connected together. I mentioned a difference. Here for the molecular element is the same nonmetal. For molecular compound, different nonmetals. I gave an example of each, O2 and H2O. For number 1, same thing. I found some similarities, differences, and gave an example of each. So I mentioned that they're both elements. They're only one type of atom. That's a similarity. However, for atomic elements, it's only one of the atoms. For molecular elements, it's two or more of the same atom connected together. So it's only one for atomic element, but two or more for molecular elements. Then I gave an example of each, Na and O2. So when you have a test, assessment, quiz, interview even, not even just for science, for anything, when you're asked a question, you have to look at the different parts of the question and make sure you hit all parts of the question to show that you know what the question is asking, to demonstrate your learning effectively. So read every question carefully and check off once you've done those different parts in the question. And so really this part of this video was to really go over some grade 9 again, show you what direction we're going into in grade 10, but also show you how to focus on questions when you're answering them.